Previously on part 1 of our Maine snowmobile special. After flying to Boston, Massachusetts and driving 4 hours to central Maine to pick up the sleds, we had made it even further north to our base for the week in Caribou, Maine. The first 2 days were spent exploring the area surrounding Madawaska Lake and the town of Limestone. We were able to explore a little of the massive, abandoned Loring Air Force Base, but deteriorating weather cut our day short. We went to bed not exactly sure what our plans would be for the upcoming day. Just like the forecast had predicted, we awoke to cloudy skies and a steady drizzle of rain. Today wasn't a good day to ride at all. The temperature was the warmest it had been the entire trip, a blistering 41 degrees, and the rain coming down was doing a number on the already icy trail. We've ridden in the rain in the past and it has been just miserable, so we decided today would be a good day to spend in the truck. We piled into the dry truck and set out for Fort Kent. Today we'd be doing a big loop along the northernmost border and along the Canadian border. We had hoped to ride this loop on snowmobiles, but that wasn't going to happen, at least today. After about an hour and a half, we had passed through Fort Kent and made it to the tiny community of Allagash, Maine. It is here where the scenic Allagash River dumps into the St. Johns River. We grabbed some poutine at a small hunting lodge and restaurant, and it was absolutely fantastic. We walked on the frozen banks of the river as the rain briefly paused. We continued back through St. Francis and Fort Kent, eastbound towards Madawaska. Madawaska is the northeasternmost town in the entire United States. Last year we had covered a lot of this area on snowmobiles after staying in St. Francis, Maine. Past Madawaska, the rain picked up yet again as we trucked along and made a right turn to head due south along the Canadian border. A couple of hours later and we were back in Limestone. The weather had again paused and we decided to attempt a driving tour of Loring Air Force Base. On the east side of the base is the Aroostook National Wildlife Refuge, and while closed this time of year, to our surprise, a ranger had met us in the parking lot and chatted with us. He was a former military police officer on the base and told us about the Loring nuclear bunkers located within the refuge. The bunkers were one of the first places in the world where nuclear bombs were loaded and stored, and about 40 bunkers remain today. The deep snow meant that we couldn't get to see them, but it was another interesting tidbit of history associated with Loring. The next couple of hours were spent driving around the Air Force Base. The roads were nearly entirely plowed and allowed us to drive past almost every single building that remains today. We passed the hangars and control towers we had seen the day before, but we also found the still active steam plant, an airfield lighting building, fire station, chapel, hospital, and several small hangars and ramps on the northwest side of the base. Each hangar building was numbered and in the past housed a wing of fighter jets. Some of the buildings have been repurposed, but most sit exactly how they did when the base was active. Our fully inclusive driving tour was finished off by a just before sunset drone flight around the base. Today, a few businesses occupy the still active Loring Commerce Center, and the Loring Job Corps is housed in the old barracks. On our third and final visit to Loring, we finally were rewarded with good weather and an excellent tour. We drove back west through Caribou where we had dinner, and of course more poutine, before making it back to the cabin. While today didn't go quite as we had planned, we were able to salvage a pretty great day exploring the region. Having missed an entire day of riding yesterday, we were up at the crack of dawn. By the time we geared up and got the sled started, it was just after 7:30. Our goal for today was to ride a 90-mile loop, roughly following the paved route we had taken the day before. We connected with ITS 83 and headed northeast. Despite the day of rain yesterday, the conditions today were still pretty great. The trail surface was hard-packed and fast-moving. In Stockholm, we split off 83 and used the 105 connector to head northeast towards Van Buren. After about an hour, covering 20 miles, we rolled into the border town. We made a quick detour and rode alongside the U.S. Customs Station and stopped to look across the river into New Brunswick with its Canadian flags flying. We topped off the tanks in town where the pumps displayed the price in both gallons and liters. After a quick snack, we continued southeast on ITS 81 as it followed Highway 1 in the St. John River Valley. The mostly clear weather meant that we were treated to nice views in the open areas. Another 20 miles later, the snowmobile trail made a slight right bend to head south. Off to our left was the Hamlin border crossing. For the next few miles, we'd be riding literally on the US-Canadian border. Boundary markers every few thousand feet designated the international border. Riding south, we passed through wide open fields and on some scenic hills, there was no physical border separating the two countries. We'd spend time riding on one side of the snowmobile trail in the US and then jump over 5 feet and ride in Canada for a while. It was great. Eventually, we arrived back in Limestone and proceeded westbound to ITS 81, 90, and eventually 83 to take us back towards the cabin. It was around 3 p.m. when we got back and began packing things up. This was our last day of riding in far northeastern Maine. From here, we would load the sleds and drive 4 hours back to Milo in central Maine, where we would spend one more night at Bill's cabin. We emptied the cabin and got the sleds loaded into the trailer one by one. The weather remained cold and windy, and the ride in the truck was a welcome relief. It was well after 8 p.m. when we pulled off the paved road and parked the trailer once again. The snowmobile trailer would stay here till the end of the season, which was quickly approaching, and we would ride the sleds back to Bill's cabin for the night. Getting back to the cabin meant hauling all of our gear on the toboggan, getting the generator started, and lighting up the wood stove. The temperature plummeted into the teens that night, and we decided to have dinner back at our favorite place in Milo that served nice warm pizza and cold beer. Today had been a productive day of riding, and we covered around 90 miles total, as well as several hours in the truck towing the snowmobiles. After a well-deserved night's rest, we got up at a decent time and immediately jumped on pancakes. Today would be our last day of riding before we had to make the long trek back to Massachusetts. Unlike the past 3 days though, we'd be riding quite a ways further south where the trails were in worse shape. We quickly jumped onto the sleds and figured we'd give it a shot anyway. From the cabin, we used an informal trail to connect with ITS 83. We headed north to Milo, where we'd be hoping to make a nice loop for the day. Conditions on the trail were mediocre at best. With the recent combination of snow and rain, they had a little bit more snow than we had seen before, but the conditions were all hard-packed and slippery. Not good for steering, or stopping, or anything really. We crossed the rickety suspension bridge over the Sebec River, where in a bout of getting stuck, Bill decided to back his snowmobile into mine. There was no damage that could be seen, so we continued north. After about 20 miles of riding, we rolled into Milo, where we once again topped off on gas. We continued northwest, but the conditions worsened. Part of the trail became a logging road where heavy traffic and recent freezing rain made just going forward a nightmare. We decided to turn around and head back the way we came before we got stuck. Retracing our route, we saw no other riders on the trail. Apparently, we were the only crazy ones out today. After fighting a little bit of ice and rough patches on the trail, we were nearly all the way back to camp when we had one last hiccup. PJ's sled decided that it no longer needed a guide wheel on the left side of the track, and it went flying off on its own. We determined it wasn't a critical issue and rode the rest of the way back to camp without any more issues for the day. We packed and cleaned up the rustic cabin and hauled all of our gear 3/4 of a mile back to Bill's truck. By time snowmobiling Maine was now over, and we loaded up all the sleds back into the trailer where they would stay parked until the end of the season. By 4 p.m. we were back on the paved road, heading south towards Boston. We stopped for dinner and one last shot at poutine before crossing the state line. Maine had been great to us. Today we had only covered about 50 miles of mediocre riding, but in all we did about 300 miles in 4 days. Not too bad. We saw some incredible sights, enjoyed a week away from work and responsibility, and have quite a few great stories to tell. There's a reason why Maine is always open for business, and a reason I try to make it up here as often as possible. Until next time, snowmobiling across Maine was once again epic.